Chapter 14. Saturday, the 8th of October, 2016, 7:58 p.m. Floor 49, Monarch Tower. Paul Serene's quarters. The glass wall afforded Paul an angel's view of Riverport. The town was nothing special. But neither had Alamogordo been before Oppenheimer, or Sarajevo before Gavrilo Princip, or for that matter, Bethlehem if he wanted to be grandiose. On official blueprints, his rooms were listed as office space. When Paul had reason to leave the building, he came and went via private helicopter, his existence a company secret. Paul had never wanted for anything material. Wise investments had furnished his parents with a pleasant home, and their son with the freedom to pursue a life of his choosing. The world had always been open to Paul, but it was Riverport, Massachusetts, not the universities of Europe or the Machiavellian war zones of world finance that had shaped him. This town, of all the places on earth, had been his crucible. Riverport had birthed him, raised him, changed him. Compressed and bound by fate, it all happened here. Urban camouflage fatigues lay pressed and ready draped across the chair beside him, props to lend authenticity to the press release he was soon to be filming. He had the chair commissioned, carved from a single piece of Fitzroya cumbrosiotis taken from the Chilean rainforest. The tree had been over 3,600 years old when Paul had it felled and turned it to something he might sit upon. It was older than the Americas, than Christianity, older than even mathematics. It was Paul's favorite chair. Time would end, but perhaps by using every part of his wealth, talent, determination, and intellect, he might liberate humanity's fate from the end he had written for it. "You're doing it again!" If he had died today, there would be no one to undo what was coming. He had risked it all to save Jack, for friendship. He could not be so irresponsible again. "Paul!" Sophia had entered, dressed for the evening in something tight, floor-length and Italian. Tablet in hand, mind forever on the project. "I'm sorry, what?" "Grinding your teeth," Sophia said. Paul felt something stir in the waters of his body. A pulse of nausea behind his eyes. He braced. "I could hear them popping in the hallway. You'll need a dentist more than you need me if you don't learn to—" Sophia slowed and froze as time hesitated, a foreshadow of an incoming stutter. They were becoming more frequent now. That was undeniable. Paul kept his composure, waited for the elongated moment to play out and snap. "The ground floor atrium looks beautiful and the demonstration space is perfect. Now, there was something you wanted to show me?" "You're about to woo the world with the wonder of chronon technology, and all of our efforts are about to conjoin. Lifeboat has a fighting chance. You're here with me. That's all I need." She had noticed nothing. That brief stutter was more severe than the last instance. A sizable one was due. "Nervous?" he asked. "Not at all." She moved closer to him. "Once the world sees with their own eyes what we have achieved, how foolish our critics will seem. The reputations of Dr. Joyce and Kim will be restored. The value of Monarch stock will ascend towards heaven, and I will find I have you to myself, even if we have to live in the shadows for the rest of our days." The timing was right. God had nodded his head. He reached inside his jacket and withdrew a slender sheaf of fire-damaged paper. "But if you could find the time to give an opinion on this, I'd be grateful." She gave him a curious look, lay her tablet on his ancient chair, and took the filthy collection of papers with both hands. Her eyes grew wide. "The regulator!" "Take your time," he said. "They're only partial, but perhaps you—" "Dr. Kim's notes! Are there more?" He wanted to tell her. Kim was a fraud. William Joyce created the regulator. But that would be a mistake. If she knew that, then she would question other truths, and force herself to analyze William's fractured reasonings and paranoid convictions. And he needed her focused. On tonight, and on the research. If anyone could learn something new about the device of the heart of the tower, it was Sophia. There was no one else. She fixed him with an expression of such need. "Paul, are there more papers like these?" He shook his head. "William Joyce stole them during the time with us. Kept them at his house. Those were all I could save." She seemed to forget him almost immediately, returning to the printouts and diagrams. I will need some time. Then she surprised him by grasping his hand, fixing him again. I love you. Do you accept that? He laid his hands atop hers. I do. His heart hurt for her, for his Sophia. She didn't know, couldn't know, that once the endgame began, she would never see him again. Saturday, 8th of October 2016, 7:58 p.m., Riverport Swimming Hall. The acoustics in the swimming hall were fantastic.
Beth, you need to see this.
Nick was in the dry pool, in one of the caster chairs. The portable TV was on. She came in from a back room, sleeves rolled up. She'd been running maintenance on her gear while she had a moment. As Beth climbed down the 3-step ladder and dropped to the bottom near the deep end, Nick turned up the volume. Details again. The state's most wanted man, Jack Joyce, was apprehended here on the sidewalk outside Sullivan's Deli about a half hour ago. According to witnesses, Joyce, age 28, approached a uniformed patrolman, hands raised. What happens next remains unclear. Shots were fired, and evidence at the scene suggests Joyce was wounded. However, we're told he was soon after wrestled to the ground and handcuffed. WSRP-TV understands he was taken to Riverport Police Department where... Turn it off. Nick clicked the remote. I thought he was upstairs. He was. He said he was going to catch a few hours sleep. I don't get it. The cops will hand him over to Monarch. The idiot thinks once he's inside the building, he'll be able to burst out and save the day. Too many of them? Nick asked. That, and he's not that good, is completely unprepared, and has no security clearance, no clue what Sophia Amaral looks like, and no idea what the layout of the building is. Ah. Beth checked her watch. A few hours until the gala kicked off. Guests would be arriving soon. Plus, they got the means to suppress chronon levels, which will almost certainly impact his ability to recover from whatever horrible shit they're about to do to him. You need to drive me to Monarch Tower right now. Saturday, 8th of October 2016, 8:10 p.m., Floor 49 Monarch Tower, Paul Serene's quarters. The axe was about to fall on the only life Paul had known for almost 2 decades. Gone would be his protection from the unknown. In 20 minutes, he would record a statement. When the time was right, that statement would be released. From that moment, the world would change forever. Every day was deja vu. The closer he got to the end, the more rapidly the unknown gave way to memories of a future he had not yet lived. He expected that in days before his death, he would be a man walking through nothing but memory until he found himself enacting the recollection of his own death. And then, there would be nothing. He glanced behind himself. Sophia at his desk. The singed remains of William Joyce's research spread across the black glass, going over each page one at a time, dictating notes into her phone in a low murmur. Footsteps in the hall. The urgency of their beat told Paul there would be no knock at the door. The door opened. Martin Hatch entered, one hand resting on the brass doorknob. Jack's here, Paul said. Martin stopped. He's been transferred from holding to this building. Sophia, Paul took her hand. I have to go. Would you meet me after, for a toast? She smiled, nodded assent. I'll see you then. He released her hand, swept his uniform from the lacquered arm of 3,600 years of history, and went to meet his future. Saturday, 8th of October 2016, 8:15 p.m., outside Monarch Tower. Nick pulled the cab up 3 blocks from Monarch Tower. Spotlights were on early, panning across the midnight surface. The lights of the forecourt and lobby could be seen from here. Limousines and armored town cars, a Monarch security detail in 2-piece formal wear opening doors while scanning sidewalks and streets. Camera flash. They're bringing him here tonight? He asked Beth. They want to get Jack inside the dampening field as fast as possible, before he realizes he's made a mistake and makes his move. This is the best and only location. Okay, listen up. Serene will evacuate Dr. Amaral as soon as she makes her presentation. So I'm going to have to go get her out of there via helicopter before she takes the stage. What I need you to do is park close and keep your phone handy. If something goes wrong, you're out backup escape. Got it? I'm gonna trust you've at least sketched this plan on a napkin. Go Team Outland. What? Beth got out, shutting the door behind. Saturday, 8th of October 2016, 8:17 p.m., floor 35, Monarch Tower. The elevator carriage lowered toward the 35th floor. The studio was set up for you on 49, Martin said. Adjacent to your quarters, they're ready to go once we're done with Joyce. And the peace movement teams? In place as per your visions. They know what to do once the stutter hits. Good. Paul, Martin said, you and I have worked toward this for half our lives. We're at 10 minutes to midnight and even so have to ask, is there no alternative to sacrificing yourself in this way? None, Paul said. Everything is a risk. Just promise me Sophie will be cared for after I'm gone. Helicopter and pilot are on standby. Have her out here and secured off-site as soon as the formalities have ended. If you feel it's necessary, we have Joyce. And he may at some point use the time machine. Infinite variables. Secure off-site. As you say. They walked into a plain hallway. Glass walled on one side. Strip lighting along floor and ceiling. Armed guards flanked in a door on the right and far end. I'm doomed, Martin. Always have been. From the moment I stepped into that machine. Paul stopped, glanced at his compatriot. The stutter's close. Have the peace teams activate the rigs now. I'll feel better. No mistakes. Martin's face was somber, almost mournful. That's it, then. Paul clasped Martin's arm. Knowing my fate has been a gift. It has allowed me to make decisions that made Monarch the force for salvation that it is. But that will count for nothing if the company does not emerge heroically from that coming chaos. For that to happen, we must have a villain. Saturday, 8th of October 2016, 8:20 p.m., outside Monarch Tower. Red carpet, velvet rope, and camera crews choke the sidewalk outside of the Monarch Solutions Visitor Center. The entryway to the tower's atrium, security, plainclothes, and otherwise, ring the block. Locals had turned out hoping to get a look at some of those big West Coast names they've heard were flying out for the bash. The reporter Beth had seen on TV back at the hall was there. Nothing the Monarch had chosen to go ahead with the gala despite an all-too-recent tragedy at the university, and that Martin Hatch was expected to make a statement. Beth crossed the street, headed for the western entrance, away from the crowds. A couple of guys were on duty, all groomed, tuxedos and bored. Hey Davis, you look pretty. Well, they're still in uniform. They got me upstairs. Bradley Cooper showing up? I heard he was in town. Anyone whose manicurist makes more than I do can blow me. You have a good night. Roger that. Beth marched between the two guards toward the security entrance, then turned back. Hey Davis, I heard they caught Joyce. Davis glanced over his shoulder at her. Gibson's people took custody about an hour ago. Got him 35. Doesn't look like much of a terrorist, but who does? Beth waved herself through security into the atrium. Beth entered the lobby from the west. The lobby floor was divided into three sections from the left to right. The main event area, the reception, and the displays. The central south-facing doors led to the security corridor. Through that was the visitor center, where guests were now being received. Within minutes, guards would open the security doors and let everyone in. The display area was intended to prime the audience for the main event. Lots of information on Chronon research, projections for its applications, but nothing too specific. Hatch was saving that for the big reveal. The main event platform was an elevated stage with full lighting rig and Marshall stacks. 2-story tall video board was backdrop. Light and sound techs were scuttling about, squaring away the final bits of unevenness, getting out of sight, running final checks. In the wings, out of sight of the main floor, she caught sight of a pilot being assisted into his juggernaut, arms reaching into the oversized chronon-powered exoskeleton. The pilot angled his legs into the frames of the juggernaut's legs. Techs consulted with tablets and diagnostics, asked the pilot to run through a few simple routines to confirm the suit was working order. The juggernauts were prototypes, a side project that had been brought under the umbrella of Monarch's Chronon Research Division. The torso was simple, blind, geometric half-shell. Each facet of the trunk had a couple of high-res optics nested at the center. From inside, the pilot navigated through the standard eyes and ears headset. The prototype's pretty much for show, which is why the rear of the thing was a naked frame and completely exposed. Beth guessed the techs wanted visibility on the innards, and to be able to get a pilot in and out quickly if needed. Nonetheless, it didn't stop them from being highly functional. The frame had enough hydraulic power to flip a station wagon and came armed. A multi-missile pod hovered in the thing's headless body on a thin, articulated arm, and the light autocannons replaced the suit's left fist. Looked like Hatch planned to go all out with the display. Mezzanines ribbed one side of the lobby from the second floor right up to the 48. 49 and 50 she knew were off limits. Saturday, 8th of October 2016, 8:20 p.m., floor 35, Monarch Tower. A guard tapped an access plate. The door to the room that held Jack Joyce slid aside. It was a typical meeting room, save for 4 pieces of abstract technology in each corner. It was nothing elaborate, but it didn't need to be. Potted plants and AV cabinets had been moved aside to ensure maximum coverage for their chronon dampeners. The floor-to-ceiling blinds had been lowered. Paul sensed the room had been nullified before he set foot inside. A familiar leadness, palpable even from the hall. Chronon 1's new senior operative was here, his fist in his palm. Donnie took his eyes from the figure handcuffed to the stainless steel designer chair in front of him, nodding in acknowledgement to his employer. Jack was slumped in the chair, chin on chest, the fabric of his jeans spattered with fresh blood. He was the only thing at the center of the room. Noting Donnie's mood, Paul glanced at Hatch. "No word on Gibson's remains?" Hatch gave the smallest shake of the head. Clearly Donnie was still processing whatever passed for grief. In Paul's experience, this breed of man had long ago replaced all secondary emotions with primary ones. "Donald, is it?" "Yup." Paul heard his teeth grind at this dismissive familiarity. Hatch cleared his throat. Chronon 1 was exceptional only in that its elite members were the first and only group to have fully passed muster in Hatch's cost-benefit calibrated viewpoint. Technicians operated in a similarly lightweight fashion, but functioned only as soldiers. C1 were, to an operative, multifaceted specialists, able to adapt, survive, infiltrate, and succeed in almost any environment. Highly trained, highly valuable. Nonetheless, Paul was very much wanted to drive 2 fingers through the man's clavicle. Donnie noticed. "Yes, sir, consultant." Martin stepped aside, gesturing with an upturned palm toward the door. "Would you mind stepping outside? We'd like to some time with Mr. Joyce." Donnie took a last, longing glance at Jack and exited the room crisply. Jack turned his head, spat blood onto the carpet, groaned. Paul crouched in front of his friend. "Jack." Jack said, "Wait," and Slack spat again. A goblet of syrupy black adhered to tooth of the fabric of his jeans. "Put that in my pocket." Paul sighed, collected the tooth between thumb and forefinger. It might have been a molar, and cleaned it on the arm of his fatigues before zipping into the pocket of his friend's leather jacket. "I can't debate this further." Paul sat on the carpet in half lotus. "Martin's mind is very clear. We should kill you. I don't want to, but I know Martin is right. What are we going to do? Tell me." Jack appeared to be forming a response, and then he blacked out. "Paul," Martin said, checking his wristwatch, "I have to go. I'm expected downstairs." "Of course. I'll be watching for my quarters. Let's return here after we've both done what we need to do, and come to a decision about Jack." Paul got to his feet, took a last look at his friend, and marched out the door. Martin did not follow. He remained in the room, bent at the waist now, peering as if committing Jack's face to memory, head tilted like a curious animal. "Martin!" Martin Hatch straightened, adjusted his jacket, and joined Paul in the corridor. Saturday, 8th of October 2016, 8:27 p.m. Parking garage. Finding a parking spot on Saturday afternoon was a bitch, even with the city on shock. Nick supposed some people need to escape, and others wanted to give a Massachusetts fuck you to the group they thought had shot up the university by going out unafraid and spending. Maybe that's why, despite the fear and the anger, there was a block's worth of star spotters pressed into the front of Monarch Tower. If only they knew that the people they were ogling were the people who had terrorized them. Monarch had made a big deal out of this gala. The publicity promised that tonight would be an unveiling of the future, the new revelation that would reinvent society, just as the printing press and the internet had done in former times, to change life on planet Earth forever. Big claims from a corporation with form got a lot of interest from people that mattered. From the third level of the parking building, Nick had a good view of the crowd of the street. Every now and then, as a new foreign-made sedan rolled up, the crowd surged forward a little and phone cameras flashed. Sometimes people exclaimed, and whatever gotten out of the word would turn a smile wave. Nick couldn't make out anyone down there. He supposed he could have checked the live coverage on his phone, but he was down to 25%. Couldn't risk a dead phone in case Beth called. Then someone turned up whom Nick did recognize, though not straight away. The man didn't step out of the polished Mercedes. His arrival started as a disturbance in the crowd on the other side of the street. First, a few turned heads, then exclamations, and then space opened up as this person moved through the crowd. From it was like watching a shark glide through a shoal of fish. The last time Nick had seen this man, he had been walking across from Monarch campus, the only gunman with the smiley mask off, like he didn't care, shooting people. The others were rounding people up, hurting them together, but that guy was smiling and shooting anyone who ran. Randall Gibson looked like hell. If people weren't looking at the tower, they were looking at Gibson's ruined clothes, his bleeding arms, his fucked up face. Randall Gibson looked like every inch a man who had somehow survived an exploding building. He hurt, that was clear. He was favoring one leg and then set his jaw, said he was gritting his teeth as much pain as fury. His eyes were dead set ahead as he moved to the crosswalk. Then he reached the traffic lights. He tapped the walk button and waited. Under the blood and dirt, Nick could tell there had been some real damage done there. The light turned green. Gibson crossed the road, shouldered through a crowd, and made for the western entrance of Monarch Tower. Nick and Beth had talked back at the pool. She told him about Gibson, about how he'd been inside Jack's place when it blew. She said he had identified her, knew she worked for Monarch. Down there, that was a man looking for blood. He'd come looking for her. Nick checked his phone. I should text her. I'll text her. Then he stopped. He didn't have her number. He didn't have her goddamn number! Saturday, 8th of October 2016, 8:27 p.m. Ground floor, atrium, Monarch Tower. Jack was on floor 35. Martin Hatch's office and helipad were on 50. There were a couple of other paths to choose from, but a bird on 50 could be guaranteed. Beth hadn't lied to Davis. Her unit was meant to be part of the security on the mezzanines, but she was early. That gave her time to roam before anyone wised up to what she was doing. Door security announced they were opening up the atrium. The attendants in the middle third of the atrium collected their trays from the temporary bar, adjusted their smiles, and got into position. There were 2 elevator bays on either side of the bar, which had temporarily replaced the receptionist station. The bays were 3-sided glass tubes built to the glossy black wall door in the middle plane. That's when she saw 7 of the 8 remaining members of Chronon 1 hanging onto floor 5, leaning on the rail, looking down on all the fuss. Beth can imagine Irene wanting to spit on heads. C1's attention swiveled to the right as Donnie stormed out of an elevator. The conversation was animated, heated. There was excitement, and then they all headed for the elevators. Beth jogged to the opposite bay, heading up as they headed down. Saturday, 8th of October 2016, 8:39 p.m. Outside Monarch Tower. Nick had only ever had 2 jobs, ushering at a Cineplex and driving a cab. With both these jobs, each night ended up wiping down seats with collecting lost property. The trunk of the cab looked like it had been stalked by raccoons. Underwear, shoes, wallets, ID, false teeth, burner phones, cheap jewelry, medical results, toys, glasses, handbags, and a laptop. There were 2 full suits, still in the dry cleaning plastic. The first one floated on him. The second one, while not perfect, was passable. 2 minutes later, he changed out of his jeans and hoodie and was failing to complete a tie. Fuck it. He did his hair in a rearview mirror, then rummaged in the driver's side footwell. He found a red plastic traveler cup in the glove compartment, with a small bottle of bourbon and a discarded pack of cigarettes. Nick poured a couple of fingers into the cup, stuck an unlit smoke between his teeth, locked the cab, grabbed the coat from the roof of the cab, and got down to street level as quickly as he could. People were still arriving, and the crowd was still straining for a look. Guards by the rope were yesing and knowing to randoms, making sure they had invites. Nick had to go through the main entrance. The guards in the western entrance weren't distracted enough. He insinuated himself into the crowd, jacked up off a cup in hand, keeping it steady as though within the press of backs and shoulders. His eyes were on the guards, looking for the one who was busiest. Heavyset dude, shades and an ear mic, fending off a 50-something blonde who felt she had the right to be there. No invite, no entry. What's her name? My security number is a dance as old as time. Nick used a few bodies to stay on the guard's blind side, and then, as though he had only occurred to him, asked, "Oh, hey buddy, sorry to interrupt." Nick held up a cup. "I'm on break, it's cool. Will I take this outside?" The guard held a hand up to the woman, silencing her for the second to Nick. "Say what?" Nick took a cigarette out of his mouth. "I said I'm on break, 10 minutes. Is it cool if I take this outside?" "You drinking?" "Steve said it was cool, said it'd be here all day." "Get the excuse me, ma'am," more civil. "Get back inside and put your jacket back on. But before I report you." Nick sighed, saluted, and stepped over the rope. Saturday, 8th of October 2016, 8:53 p.m., outside Monarch Tower. It was about to get ugly for Davis and his partner where Gibson's squad came out of the security door behind them. Donnie sholoed Davis out of the way as Cronin Juan pulled up before the scarred, fucked-up wreck of the former senior operative. "Boss!" Gibson's left eye was swollen and fused shut. Hair had been seared away in patches. He was missing a tooth. His skin and fatigues were black with impacted soot, ash, and blood, slashed along the arms and knees. Keeping the weight off of his leg gave him the posture of something had crawled out of a crater. "Hey, Donnie, you want to get these nun-fuckers away from me?" "Sure, boss." Davis and his partner backed off, herded away by bloodless glances from Voss and Irene. "Seen Beth Walder around?" "The washout? Her unit's doing internal for sure. Why?" "Get me inside." "Sure thing, Voss. Scramble a medic." "Fuck that. Get me inside." "Davis, you say nothing. Donnie, let's go." Saturday, 8th of October 2016, 9 p.m., Monarch Tower, Atrium. The two-story video board faded out the images of foreign lands, laboratories, workers, children, and innovations cross-faded to the company logo, the word Monarch fading in peacefully atop it. Martin Hatch took the stage. The crowd applauded. "Invited guests, thank you for being with us here this evening. You all know me. I am Martin Hatch, CEO of Monarch Solutions. I know a few of you have been noticed the four strange-looking objects arrayed about us." Hatch pointed to the four Stutterfield pylons, delineating the western third of the atrium, bracketing the audience. Chrome and hazard-striped, each had a small chronon battery affixed to its base. Each one was manned by a chronon technician. "I overheard my good friend Harold Ashworth, CEO of EXA, wonder to his lovely wife if perhaps Monarch's big announcement would be that we were branching out into production of avant-garde furniture." The crowd laughed. "No, Howard, we are not." A few chuckles. "For tonight's demonstration, to truly impress, I request that you all ensure you're within the yellow border marked out on the floor for you." Beth double-checked her notebook, filled with dates and times and scraps of future information. Beth's future self had written in that notebook that Monarch's gala was about to get hit with a stutter. The elevator came to a stop. Getting off at 35, she turned the rescue rig. Her skin tingled, sharp, and subsided. Monarch Tower was a hell of an operation. Within 5 years, it'll be a fully functioning arcology. A city within a building within Riverport. Entirely self-sufficient. Apartments, a small school, gardens, water, recycling, the lot. The perfect place to hide out come the end of time. Assuming Project Lifeboat was on its feet by then. Still only in the blueprints phase, Horatio hadn't been able to fashion how they get the chronon efficiency to the required levels in time. Despite the size of the company, Monarch didn't have the capital resources or personnel to pull it off within 5 years. Lifeboat didn't just want to shield the tower. It required operatives that could survive for months in the wild. The energy reserves required to do that were monstrous, unthinkable. Her ear mic patched her into Monarch comms. A couple of people in her unit were already on duty. Lower down, updating over Monarch frequencies. Questions were asked about the fate of Jack Joyce. Through this, Beth knew exactly where they were keeping him. Beth carted herself through the first security door and into the warren of corridors on 35. She accepted that her progress would be tracked. Questions would be asked, but it didn't matter. By the time tonight was over, Monarch would know she had given notice. Abducting their key scientist would make that pretty clear. She would find Jack, free him, and incorporate him into the plan, assuming the idiot was still breathing. She rounded the corner, was heading for the room where Jack was being held, where the first pre-stutter hit. It was unexpected, but she seized the opportunity, broke into a run, double-pumped her hand to get to the chronon flow going, got between two frozen guards at the end of the hall, and used her live left hand to swing the time-lock door open. She skidded to a halt, stopping in time to avoid crossing into the stutter field, which would have nullified her rescue rig and rendered her immobile. Jack was in the chair, frozen. Beth closed the door behind her. The stutter broke.
What you say?
One guard said.
I ain't say anything,
replied the other. Jack was reanimated. Beth held a finger to her lips. Quietly she deactivated the stutter pylons. Hey, he whispered. She unfolded her knife, snipped the zip ties holding him to the chair, looked him in the eye, and explained in detail how she intended to hammer his balls flat on a stump. The lights dimmed by half, and Hatch waited as the music swelled. The video board lit up with an on-message color and movement melange, orchestral segueing to dubstep as family values imagery cut to forest fringe highways, gear-shifting vehicles, repelling troopers, sweat, strain, sharp eyes, and bared teeth, all coming to an explosive halt on the Monarch logo. In exchange for 6 figures, a Mayfair agency had provided 45 seconds of idiocy. Hatch waited respectfully as the applause faded. Friends, he said, let's talk about death. The video board behind him flared white. A scene in a hospital ward. A mourning family gathers at the bedside of a fading grandmother. No matter your demographic, Hatch said, the number one killer is time. The scene cross-faded to a desert battlefield. A lieutenant calling for backup in a pall of orange dust providing fantastic depth of field. At Monarch Solutions, we've elected to remove time from death's equation. Back in the hospital now, the lieutenant lay on a gurney. Recognizing the columns that surround the fallen lieutenant's bed, the crowd awed, intrigued. Imagine if you could pause time for the terminally ill. Imagine a mortality-wounded soldier or a gravely ill loved one, suspended perfectly for as long as it's needed, at the flick of a switch. Hatch snapped his fingers, and a gently luminous canopy enveloped the bedridden lieutenant on screen. Chronon stasis technology keeps the patient safe within a moment that will continue to self-divide for as long as medical technicians deems it necessary. The person's conditions will never deteriorate. They will never age. If need be, they can remain in that localized zero state for years, even decades, until a cure for the conditions or a donor organ is found or can be grown. The crowd applauded. But there are so many more applications. Spotlights sprang to life, swept to darkened corners at the back of the stage. Exclamations from the audience as 2 juggernauts cycled to life, stood erect, and strode to the front of the stage. Laser targeters panning across the assembled crowd. In the wings, Sophia Amaral tapped her foot and checked a watch. Her cue was coming up, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about the notes Paul had salvaged from Joyce's house. Dr. Kim's plans for the regulator. How had Joyce purloined these documents? Joyce and Kim had been colleagues at one point years ago. That much she knew. William Joyce must have acquired the documents during this time as consultant from Project Promenade, and then studied Kim's design in secret. What scraps that remained were littered with parenthetical notes and observations. Had Joyce been an early collaborator on the Regulator project? Had he felt sidelined? Had there been bad blood between the two? No matter how, her crucial finding was this. It was now clear that the device was not intentioned to function as a power source, but had been designed to release its massive charge in one focused burst. But why? Why had Kim build such a device? And why his charade of attempting to plumb the device's secrets, as though its creation had been little bit more a quirk of fate? She shook her head. She hadn't been trusted with details. There was more going on, and clearly had been deemed above her security level. The man she loved had been keeping her ignorant. Her expertise and professionalism had not been trusted. That hurt her deeply. This has driven her to reassess her own calculations, and try as she might, she still could find no error of process, calculation, or reasoning. The end of time was approaching. It was going to hit, and far sooner than Paul believed. She had to speak to him. He may not have trusted her with the true nature of the regulator project or her role in it, but Sophia's pride demanded that Paul hear her on this. The life of the universe was at stake.
Handing herself in was a dick move, Jack. Jack kept his voice low. I got arrested so you wouldn't have to risk yourself. He stood, rubbing his wrists. You can worry once I go back to meet my younger self. Until then, I'm protected by a chain of causality connected to collapse waveform. Take this. She handed him her gun. What about you? I'll grab one when the next mini stutter rolls in. I need you to tell me when you sense one about to hit. We use those to leapfrog from concealment to concealment until we get to the ground floor. Once the main stutter lands, we take Sophia, get to the roof, steal Paul's helicopter. With luck, we could be back at the pool before the stutter breaks. I overheard Paul saying he was watching the gala from upstairs. Security's super tight up there. Okay, fine. I've got Nick outside on standby. We can book it out of the western exit, take our chances on the road. The screen behind Hatch shifted to a collage of 10 faces. The 10 students killed early that morning at Riverport University. Standing at the back watching, Nick recognized two people he had tried to save. A man and a woman gunned down in Founder's Walk as they ran for his cab. They faded out as Martin Hatch, the man who had ordered them killed, concluded his homily. Nick kept his fist jammed in his pockets on his borrowed suit, sweating. Friends, here is where I think the chrono technology shows its worth. Take a scene like the one that terrorized this town this morning, then bracket the location with 4 high-strength zero-state pylons. Everyone that bracket freezes. Time stopped. Hatch stood aside, swept an arm toward a person standing at the back of the stage. Our chronon technician. A jumpsuited Monarch employee stepped forward. Running the zip down her front, she revealed the lightweight chrome and wire frame that followed the lines of her torso and libs. Our lightweight model built for the basics. Operative Wilson here is wearing a rescue rig. This enables her to move freely in a zero state and to release items and people from that state at will. Next. A larger figure strode in from the stage left, carrying an assault rifle. In profile, he was a man in modern white armor fitted with a black gas mask. On his back was a broad dome, studded with what looked like soda can-sized fuses. Each of the fuses glowed with a pulsing amber heat. The figure pivoted and walked down stage into the light. Our striker, fully mobile within zero state. He is armored for combat operations. As an added extra, he is also able to manipulate his relationship to the person in Maya Joyce envelope, folding deeper into the stutter, briefly inhabiting a smaller subdividing moment within a larger one, but with no loss of mobility. What this means, Hatch said, is that within a zero state, the striker has the capacity for super speed, crossing short distances in quick bursts, useful for rapid response and flanking maneuvers. Hatch spread his arms, and 2 spots found the oversized, seemingly headless, blank surface exoskeleton stationed at either side of the stage. And finally our large friends, the Juggernauts. The crowd went nuts. They couldn't get enough of the big guys. Gentlemen, if you'd be kind enough, Hatch made a circling motions with his hands. The Juggernauts rotated in an ungainly fashion, displaying their open backs. There was a clack and a soft whine as the 2 pilots released from their harnesses and stepped free. We've left off the back half of the Juggernaut's signature clamshell design to give you a better look at how these fellows work on the inside. The stuff they were showing off was pure eye candy. Nick wanted to see more of the show, especially all the detail in the Juggernaut prototypes, but he couldn't. He had to find Beth, and nearby elevator pinged open. As its passengers exited, Nick stepped inside. An info screen opened up in the glass wall. Welcome, visitor. How can I help you? Nick realized he had no idea where to go, and also that most of the building was locked off without a security pass. Out of nowhere, a rush of bodies and hardware filled the elevator carriage. Big dudes and one serious-looking woman in Monarch fatigues, all packing firearms. Floor 35, one of them said. Someone swiped the card and hit the button. The last one in was Randall Gibson. Nick's spine snapped rigid. He didn't move, pretending to be deeply interested in the wall map. Nobody touches her, Gibson said low. We find her. We do her. We report it. Busted, messed up Gibson. He filled the elevator with the thick smell of old sweat and smoke. One of his eyes was actually fused shut. Any one of these people could kill Nick as easily as turning off a TV. The elevator began to rise. Nick watched the atrium fall away beneath him. "How'd you make it, boss? I heard—" "Triangle of life," Gibson muttered. "I hit the dirt alongside a couch. Beams and shit hit the couch, left me a tight shelter next to it. Debris hit the shelter, left me in a pocket." He coughed. Sounded wet. "I'm good." "Rig's on," one of them said. "Stutters." 30 seconds later, the elevator shushed to a stop on 35, pulling level with its glass-walled neighbor as two people filed into it. Nick looked through the glass walls that separated the two elevators and instantly recognized two people inside the opposite. Jack and Beth. "Boss!" Beth's head snapped toward them, recognized Gibson's squad, and then clocked Nick. Nick shook his head tightly, terrified. "Do not acknowledge me in this elevator full of killers." Nick's elevator emptied in a heartbeat as the doors to Beth and Jack's hissed shut. She glared at him, mouthed, "What the fuck?" And then they descended. "Senior opposite of Gibson, sir." Two Monarch regulars came to a halt before the squad. "Sir, Jack Joyce, he's—" Nick stepped out of the elevator just as Gibson's squad rushed to pursue Jack and Beth. The elevator chimed shut and departed. The two Monarch guards looked as though their careers were flashing before their eyes, disappeared through the security door they appeared from, barking into ear mics. "Right," Nick mumbled, trapped. "Now what?" Martin Hatch accepted the applause. "Now, friends, if you would be kind enough to stay within the yellow zone, we would like to conclude with a practical demonstration of this world-changing technology. We'll need all of you to space out evenly, and marks have been provided." People shuffled, each choosing a mark for themselves, taking position. Hatch got a thumbs up from the 4 chronon techs. 3, 2, 1. Hatch snapped his fingers. The techs activated the pylons. The chronon levels within the sanctioned-off piece of the MJ field dropped, and the entire crowd froze. The operatives on stage got into new positions. The pylons shut off. The crowd reanimated, exclaimed as the operatives teleported before them, and burst into applause. Hatch snapped his fingers. The crowd froze. The operatives rearranged. The pylon shut off. The crowd came to life. Their laughter and applause turned into ecstatic roar. Repeat. Disbelief. Delirium. Dollar signs. From the audience's perspective, each time Hatch clicked his fingers, everything changed in a moment. Hatch's smile was wide, but there was no joy in his eyes. He clicked again. Paul in his quarters on the 49th floor sipped a small glass of champagne, dressed for operations in Under Armour and urban camouflage. Martin's demonstration was playing out of the closed-circuit feed displayed on a laptop. It all seemed to be going well. Then the call came over a Monarch secure channel. Jack was loose. Paul immediately switched the feed to elevator cams, and there was Jack in the company of a Monarch employee, headed for the ground floor, for Martin's demonstration. Sophia. She was down there with Martin, waiting to give her presentation. The elevator identified the employee accompanying Jack as Beth Wilder. Paul called up her file. Her face looked back at him, and he felt viscerally a lost part of his own story clicked into place. "I know you, Beth." He tapped the desk, contacted the on-duty security chief. The voice on the end of the phone demanded identification. Paul Serene had effectively founded Monarch, and yet he'd be stopped at reception if he walked in unaccompanied. "I'm placing an alert on Beth Wilder. Employee, Mikey Romeo 1014 with Martin Hatch's authority code. Mike Romeo..." What was it? What was that blasted number? 11904 Golf Sierra. Do you copy? Choosing one through above all the others hurt so much. His hand throbbed. He needed another treatment, and soon.
Who is this?
The idiot on the line demanded again. Lifeboat success required him to be a non-entity, but it never ceased to be an indignity. "Do you copy?" A pause on the line.
The code checks out.
20 technicians, chronon enabled, ground floor, extreme prejudice. You will have stutter cover, double time.
Whoever this is, we're not gonna need 20 minutes to stop one girl.
That neatly put together redhead was a woman Paul had met once a very long time ago. A long time from now. They won't be able to stop her, Paul told the security chief, getting out of his seat. But they might slow her down. Cutting the line, he ran for the elevator. The elevator hushed open, parallel to the main stage. The crowd was loving it, freezing and unfreezing. This was entertainment to them. A show, not cutting-edge science that could change the world. The elevators were outside the pylon's bracket and remained unaffected by the demonstration. Beth, we got 10, maybe 15 seconds before the stutter hits. The second elevator with Gibson's goons was right behind them. Beth exited. Get Sophia. She's Brazilian, 5'8", about $120, dark hair, cut in a bob, carrying a tablet. She'll be backstage. Check the wings, I'll draw them off. She ducked into the assembly before Jack could protest. The second elevator opened and Chronon 1 fanned out, by which time Jack had warped toward cover and side stage. Scaffolding, black cloth drapes, security barricades. He was over and up the aluminum stairs in a blink backstage. The stutter slammed into being, disorienting. The entire world went still. The area for the demonstration had been boxed out in yellow with audience members asked to space out evenly. The Monarch performers were getting off the stage and taking up positions next to the audience members, intending to wow them once the stutter broke. Gibson silently signaled to his crew to hold up. Hatch was on stage, waiting for the stutter to break before he could wrap up the performance. Gibson didn't want him tipped off that something was up. No shooting, Gibson said. Mr. Hatch needs to see this go well. She's got a gun, boss. You really want to bring blades to a gunfight? Irene said. She won't shoot. She knows as well as we do these people are bulletproof while immobile. Once the stutter breaks and the bullets start flying, heads pop. Irene sighed, unclipped her knife. The elevator came to a sudden life, heading back up to retrieve a passenger. Someone upstairs had channeled chronon flow from the regulator to the elevator's rig, part of the tower's emergency system. That took authority. The elevator headed back up. Emergency system. Someone with clouds coming down. Gibson drew his knife. Work fast. From the wings, Jack could tell the stage was clear. The operatives were in position in the crowd, ready to surprise a few randomly selected guests by materializing in front of them. Jack saw Sophia in the wings, frozen in the act of checking her watch. Folding into a sub-moment, he jetted across the space, unseen right up next to her. All right, Doctor, I'm going to need you to work with me here. Jack stepped behind her, placed one hand around her waist and one over her mouth, everything about her hard as stone. I'm really sorry about this. With little concentration, he extended his chronon field across her and felt her begin to cohere into the frozen moment. Sophia came with a hand over her mouth and freaked out. Shh, not gonna hurt you, but I can't let you go. You gotta listen to me. That didn't work. She elbowed Jack hard in the ribs, driving one stilettoed heel hard into his foot. Jack bit down on the pain. Friend, he hissed. My name is Jack Joyce. William Joyce was my brother. Beth moved low through the forest of still bodies, stealing glances toward the stage. Hatch was immobile. She couldn't see Jack. Chronon 1 was entirely focused on her. We need you to help us, Jack continued. Sophia twisted in his grip. I do not care, then stomped. It dawned on her that the world around her had stopped moving entirely. The demonstration was to encapsulate the audience, not the entire building. You admired Will, believed in his work. He mentioned you in his notes. Sophia wasn't listening. She was taking it all in, like a kid in her first snowfall. Zero state, she breathed. We exist within a deformation in the Myers-Joyce field. Yet we see, we hear, we breathe, move. She wheeled on him, twisting round in his arms. You must come with me. Paul needs you. Sophia glanced behind herself at Hatch, ecstatic as all those gleeful faces before him. Paul's mistaken. Will had a countermeasure. You understand? We could stop the end before it happens. Countermeasure? Sophia came off. To repair the fracture in the Myers-Joyce field? To save us, Jack said. From the end of time. You. It was Paul, a portrait of fury at the far side of the stage. Every Chronon operative in the audience turned reflexively, with no idea what to make of the scene on stage. Performers to soldiers, weapons up. The jumpsuit technician barked, On your knees! Weapons were pointed at all of them, Paul included. Paul had no time for them, stalked across the stage toward Jack.
Get away from her!
Jack realized they had no idea who Paul was.
On your knees!
The tech shouted, weapons tensed in all hands.
Final warning!
Gibson risked a glance and saw the morons from the stage show pointing assault weapons at the consultant.
Hold fire! Hold fire! Target, male, left, all others high-value friendlies. Strikers, go!
The two armored strikers, soda can fuses flaring sun-hot, flashed up from the audience, boiling energy tracing from their back units. Sophia shrieked as they tore past. Jack let go of Sophia and dashed 15 feet out of the stage as the strikers snapped to a halt. A lucky swing saw a rifle butt glance across his forehead. Paul darted across the stage, driving his shoulder into Jack's back and continuing on his way up to the top in front of Sophia. Jack spun with Paul's passing blow, the pistol slipping from his hand to skid across the stage, his back on fire. Paul took Sophia's hand. "Come with me!" The strikers flashed forward, each one taking a lock hold on one of Jack's arms, jetting him across the stage head first toward the marshal stack. Jack warped backwards, just a nudge, the reverse momentum swinging the two strikers into each other's faces. There was a crack of shattering faceplates, and Jack's arms were almost ripped off in the process. He turned to see Paul spiriting Sophia into the shadows of the wings. Beth saw Paul take Sophia through stage right, Beth's left. She moved fast and low, aiming a circle around the back of the stage and intercept. The jumpsuited technician had her handgun out, while the juggernauts awkwardly angled for a shot that would endanger Hatch, still frozen on stage as the satisfied host. But they were having trouble navigating through a sea of smiling people who might as well have been made of concrete. The strikers recovered as Jack went for his gun. They split his focus by zipping left and right. He tracked one and popped a localized substutter over him. The striker slowed fractionally and then escaped the field, his mobility rig rendering him largely immune. While Jack was diverted, the other striker flashed in from behind and smashed his rifle like a club into the back of Jack's legs, which was when Jack realized the weapons were unloaded show models. Jack went down hard as the technician closed in with cuffs. Jack warped forward, cannonballing her legs out from under her, rolling to the stutter's shield, but he just dropped as he snapped a shot off after him. Okay. Her firearm was loaded. The bullet impacted the shield, caught. Jack stood, his knee feeling cracked, side by side with unmoving Martin Hatch. Jack's energy levels were low, running out of zip. The strikers didn't seem to have the same problem. They were wearing him down. Beth exited the crowd and looped around the left side of the stage. Irene was waiting for her. "Hey there, chicken!" Knife out, combat gripped. There was no innocence behind Irene, so Beth drew her gun. Irene leaped right, under the stage. Jack stayed under the shield, played up his difficulty standing, and then let him come in. One striker to the left and another to the right. The technician dead ahead with her gun leveled, two juggernauts behind. But he had to assume the autocannons were for show. The strikers communicated something to each other. They were warped in hard, slowing a little bit as he hit the shield. Enough time for Jack to fold into a sub moment, blip backward, grab the striker's back unit as he passed, and pull. There was an alarming crack of energy. And reflexively, Jack blip kicked the striker out of the shield, where he'd crashed into the back of his partner. The first detonated almost instantly in a corona of yellow-hot energy, setting off the corona pack on the second, and eruptions that sent them rocketing over the audience where he exploded and locked. The technician got caught in that first blast, was thrown backward by the eruption, leaving all three actors frozen in a catastrophic ballet mid-air as their rigs shorted. Jack ran out of charge. His shield flickered and vanished. Beth cornered around the rear of the stage in time to see Paul Serene drag Sophia toward one of the two western elevators. The second elevator opened and 20 heavily armed and rigged goons poured out. Paul glared at his security and shouted, "Stop her!" Beth dove under the stage as two of them opened fire. 3-round bursts, chipping craters out of the black Italian marble. "Hey, chicken!" Irene was back. The blade came out of nowhere, sliced the top of Beth's right shoulder. A line of white pain dangerously close to her carotid. The space was tight and low under the stage, interlaced with diagonal supports. Irene went for a second strike. Beth reflexively fired. No target, but the sound was enough to make her opponent flinch. Beth twisted away from Irene's messed up second strike, aiming her left shoulder toward the floor, firing twice as she went over. But Irene had followed through on the momentum of her aborted strike and used it to roll clear and vanish into the mass of shadow, half-formed shapes and scaffolding. Beth sent 2 more shots after her, hoping for the best. Adrenalized and breathing hard, Beth rolled back on her knees, ignoring the blood on her hands and legs, and headed for the audience side of the platform. Slipping out from under the black cloth, she kept low and got back among the statue crowd, equidistant below the 2 juggernauts, and were now moving in the open space on either side of the stage. Hatch was still frozen on stage. A striker was paused behind him, mid-explosion, as was the technician he had slammed into. Above Beth's head, a second striker was airborne above the first row of the crowd, his back unit rupturing. Jack was on stage, breathing heavily. "Jack!" He saw her. She motioned, "Get after Paul," then ran deeper into the unmoving crowd, firing her pistol twice into the air. Every unit present, save the juggernauts, went after her like it was their mission. Jack ran into the wings, headed for the elevators. Beth bolted through the reception area. Open bar, servers, trays of champagne, and beyond that into the far third of the atrium. It was all business here. The area was divided into 9 islands, each island showing off a subsidiary of 2 of Monarch Solutions: innovations, industrial, pharmaceutical, multimedia, technology, business, energy, financial, security, childcare, aerospace, agriculture, human resources, protective service, automotive, L&T, consumer, construction, entertainment, and communications. Even passing the displays at a run, and easy for Beth to see how Monarch was becoming ubiquitous. Hatch and Serena had a finger in every pie going. Superpowers and foreknowledge went a long way. Her pursuers entered the reception area as she jagged behind a giant display for a gaming console Monarch Entertainment was releasing next fall. They opened fire on her, rounds fragmenting and sparking off frozen bystanders and objects. Those bullets that sailed past eventually slowed to a halt. When the stutter broke, they would continue on their deadly course. "These people are investors, assholes!" she shouted. Thankfully, Hatch's demo had pulled almost every person in the atrium toward it. The display area was mostly people free, and she was running away from bystanders. Her pursuers weren't listening. She caught glimpses of 20 technicians fanning out, Cron on one bringing up the rear. Monster-faced Gibson super pissed. Gibson knew what Wilder was up to. She was falling back to the eastern elevator bays, pulling attention from Joyce's pursuit of Mr. Serene and Dr. Amaral. He rounded on C1 and headed double time back the way they'd come.
"Top floor, now!"
The reinforcements fired at Beth with little fear of hurting anyone, but Beth's firing line included the demo crowd on the other side of the atrium, directly behind every asshole that was coming after her. Fuck it, she's been telling Jack she couldn't die. Time to put her money where her mouth was. 3 5-man squads crept down the aisle piece while the 4th hung back covering. Beth waited behind the medical display at the far end, leftmost aisle. In moments, 15 armed men would be in her firing line as they passed the final displays. She swung out when she heard the nearest squad just around the corner. The stutter broke. A striker in front of the stage arced out into the audience, back unit exploding, before flailing heavily to smash through the tables and glassware. On stage, a striker detonated as he flew into the nice technician lady in the jumpsuit. Gunshots rang out simultaneously on stage and beneath it. Reanimated bullets whipped to life in display action and blew a Monarch GMO display to pieces. Hatch, however, was gone. People freaked the fuck out. Beth shot 5 goons in the legs and ran for the nearby eastern elevator bays. The middle squad moved to assist their injured comrades while the 3rd and most disciplined squad opened up, perforating a 3D printed concept car as she fled. Jack felt the stutter quit as his elevator arrived in the 50th floor. The elevator purred.
"Good night, Dr. Admiral."
Jack pocketed Sophia's ID. "I've had better." A security door was pneumatically swinging shut as he exited. A short dash and he was through, the door clicking behind him. Down a corridor to his left he heard Sophia cry out. Paul booted through a security door into Martin's 1,000-square-foot private garden, an open-air platform, green and pathed, with a bird's-eye view of the city. A series of stone steps led to Martin's office dead ahead. The branching path also led right, toward the Chronon operations for the building.
When the tower was designed, Martin had been clear. He wanted to be close to the most critical elements of Project Lifeboats. "Faster," he said. "We gotta make it to the helicopter before—" His hand tore from Sophia's grasp as her soft flesh turned to stone. The stutter had kicked in again. Sophia stood, static, movement captured in her pose, the expression on her face perplexed and anxious. Behind her, monsters, shifters, the ones from the Joyce farm. The same ones he always saw. He was sure of that now. Ahead foremost and advancing came the shining palm. Jack caught sight of them. As Paul opened the door to a rooftop garden at the end of a long enameled wood hallway, Jack folded, propelled forward, but not fast enough. He felt the stutter kick back in, a pulse throughout his entire body. With a desperate surge, he wedged a hand in the door, tore it open, and got through. The tight enclosed hallway led to a green expanse open to a night sky, slashed by the slow beams of spotlights positioned on every corner of the Monarch Tower block. A Y-shaped path divided flat green lawn, one path branching left toward a pillared glass-fronted facade of what had been Martin Hatch's apartment, the other cut right toward a doorway in the building proper. Had to be the Chronon Labs, like Beth said. The apartment was fronted with a pillared open-air deck. An L-shaped gantry led from that, over a 50-floor drop to a suspended helipad where the helicopter waited, lit bright, polished, and shark-like. Paul had stopped running. Sophia, having deanimated for a second time as she stopped cold and the stutter settled in. A wall of shifters stood between himself and Paul. Paul was pinned, terrified. That was the kid he remembered from Bannerman's Overlook. The phalanx of shifters recoiled, shrieking with something like rage or pain, as Jack had thrown the door open, as if his very appearance had set a wave of fire rolling through them all. As one, they forgot poor, terrified Paul and rounded on Jack. Jack was a closer potential generator than Paul, and because he was making this up as he went along, generated more shifter agonizing variables. He was an excruciating presence to these monsters, and as such, a thing to be destroyed. The only one who did not turn was Shining Palm. Sophia remained between Jack and Paul, as potential and causality, dead as stone. Safe, invisible to the shifters, and unable to be harmed. The shifters roared, fritzing and flashing, and Jack bailed, running hard back the way he came. They were too close, there were too many, and he had nowhere to lose them. Paul backed away. Shining Palm hesitated, head whipping from Paul to the pursuing horde and back. With a final glance as its sweaty prey, the Shining Palm turned and bounded after its hunting kin. Paul remained, stunned into disbelief by his continued survival. The creature had him right there. Why had it chosen to— "Run, you idiot!" Paul fled toward the security door and into the tower. The Chronon research labs would have stutter generators. He would be safe there until the stutter broke. When it was over, when Jack was dead, he would return for Sophia. Monarch Tower's Chronon response had kicked in, channeling particles to the elevators and keeping them alive. Beth was grateful for that. As she stepped out onto floor 50, an overeager fusillade of automatic gunfire sparked and flashed off in time-locked glass wall opposite the elevator.
Fight back, bitch!
Gibson. He'd circled back and cut her off. Another spray came her way, angled for the doorframe. Beth threw her hands up, shielding her face from hot fragmented sprays. She didn't think. Double pumping her free hand, she pushed off against the elevator's wall and leaped across the space between the elevator and the glass wall in front of her. Christ, did the high-pitched vip of incoming rounds always have to sound so goddamn happy? None of them connected. In a single fluid move, she hit the carpet, rolled, pressed her free hand to the glass, unlocking it to vulnerability, and put 2 rounds through it. The wall dropped in a single, sparkling sheet of cubed safety glass, and Beth leaped inside, clear of Gibson's line of sight. Meeting room. Glass wall with door opposite her. Hallway outside. Cube farm beyond the other glass wall. Horatio had walked her through this level. Helipad outside Hatch's office. Office on opposite side of the garden. Garden was that way. She double pumped her hands, opening the door, and took off left down the hall. At the 4-way corridor junction 50 feet ahead, Gibson rounded the corner, assault rifle leveled at the hip.
Hold up, pumpkin butter.
One barking shot lanced across the space between them. Pain. Beth's legs went out from under her. She hit the floor face first, hard. The pain took her breath away.
That's more like it.
A piece of her outer left thigh had been blown away. With one hand clamped to the wound, she grabbed for her lost weapon. Gibson opened up. Rounds sparked and fragged inches from her fingers. She whipped her hand back.
Leave the hand there, darling.
Gibson walked forward. C1 brought up the rear. All 8 of them.
I'm gonna shoot that fucking thing right off.
He spat to the side.
For starters.
Boss!
Donnie piped up.
Not now, Donnie.
Boss!
I said not.
Gibson stopped. Howls.
Shit.
Jack Joyce came sprinting around the corner, bringing a shrieking, tumbling wall of clawed, fractured madness with him.
Shifters!
Gibson, Donnie, and Reeves saw them coming and split back, the way they came to the mezzanine. Irene and Voss jagged opposite, heading deeper into the warren of cubicles, toward the fortified Chronon labs behind that. Mully had been covering the carving wooden hall leading toward Hatch's private garden, and had that most ground to cover to make an escape. Bristol watched as reactive thinking short-circuited Mully's ability to adapt. He could have blasted the glass wall as Beth had done and sidestepped the tide, but he didn't. A paw, flicking and phasing and hooked, swept up and through Mully's shoulder from behind. Without slowing, the shifter lifted the screaming trooper over its shoulder, tossing it back into the pack. Bristol saw a roiling, fractal head rise from the back of the surge, along with 2 crackling arms, to pile-drive Mully out of sight. Bristol saw all of this when he should have been running. A prone Beth saw 2 shifters do things to Bristol's geometry as the screaming trooper was smashed underfoot. Things that would stay in her head forever. Jack skidded to a halt and hauled her up, the horde 30 feet behind.
Up! Up! Up!
No hope. The shifters were already on them. Beth closed her eyes. Howls. Jack turned, shielding her, and one shifter flew left through the shattered office wall. Another was grabbed by the head and pulled backward to the ground. A third shifter, the largest, drove a crackling foot into the creature's chest, pinning it to the floor. Chronon flow arced off the flailing body, played off the walls. Jack saw flashes of the same hallway, decorating and designed a dozen different ways as slowly collapsing MJ fields sliced the place up along different timelines. Sometimes it wasn't decorated so much as destroyed. Alternate hallways, alternating comes as alternating presence. With his own eyes, Jack watched reality inch closer to falling apart completely. The big shifter threw its arm wide and screamed. Eyes wide, hands wide, shining palm. The pack held back behind it, cowed. The shifter on the floor thrashed infinitely, simultaneously. Jack stumbled backward. Beth was on her feet, hauling him now, hobbling heavily on one good leg.
This way! Run!
Blood flowed thick between the fingers, clamped to her wound.
Beth, what's happening?
Without warning, the stutter collapsed. Every still bullet flew free. Glass wall shatters, and the shifters abruptly vanished.
This won't last. Run!
Paul made it into the Chronon research wing as causality kicked back in. Was it over? No. Just another temporary cessation. He could feel this event was not yet spent. This exertion was costing him. The lack of focus was taking hold again. The feeling of becoming unmoored from his body, from the world. The desire to surrender to care. To allow the release to course through his entire body and take him. The voice of his sickness, his Chronon syndrome, was growing louder, more seductive, within the chamber of his mind, taking up space once occupied by his own counsel. Treatment. He required treatment. Sophia's lab. He would administer the treatment to himself, within the safety of an artificial pylon-generated bubble of causality, and soothe this madness. Once the chaos had passed, there would be work to do, damage to contain, steps to take. The final steps. He pushed through secondary lab spaces, past coldly lit glass info boards and the warm hum of sterile machinery. Sophia's laboratory was at the far end of this array, from which she could oversee all of the work being done in her name, to her guidance. It was elevated above the broad glass boxes in the labs were contained. Moving through the secondary labs, Sophia's quarters were always visible through clear plexiglass ceilings. Of modern design, Sophia's quarters were configured for living as much as working. A flat oblong with a long observation window suspended above a glass-roofed lab farm. It had been designed to her specifications, on Paul's orders. Moving at speed toward these quarters and the relief they contained, Paul watched a wide tongue of flame shoot from the observation window, spitting glass. Secondary explosions took the roof and walls off Sophia's laboratory quarters completely. Heavy debris blew outward and upward to crash down through the glass ceilings of the secondary laboratories. Paul watched his only hope of forestalling the progress of his condition literally vanish in flames. Overwhelmed, Paul blacked out. When he came to, his hands were bloody and a nearby workstation was trashed. A desk snapped in half. His left arm was on fire, as was his chest. A coppery taste filled his mouth. His chest was alight with starlight and his mind full of howling. Remembering himself was like struggling to remember a dream. Muscle memory took his hand to his chest. Fingers closed around Aberfoyle's bullet. He was Paul Serene, the future of humanity, and he must live. Monitors above the workstation flashed meaningless information. He found a laptop, shakily entered his credentials, and switched to secure feeds. Called up the feed for floor 50, scanned. Found the corridors. Smashed walls, smashed glass, 2 members of Chronon 1 who had entered their lives horribly as complex stains on expensive carpet. Scanned. Jack and Beth running for the garden. There she was. Beth, hobbling on a wounded leg, closing on Sophia, who was now reanimated and discovering herself completely alone. Paul fumbled for his earpiece, switched frequencies, contacted the helicopter pilot. "Leave!"
Sir?
"Get that bird away from this building, pilot, or I'll kill you myself! Go!" Jack approached Sophia quickly, hands up and open. She was not receptive. "No, not again!" She was close to hyperventilating. The mind is not meant to take such shocks. Where is Paul? Paul was here! Where is... Beth grabbed Sophia's hand on her own bloody one. Sophia recoiled. "Oh my God, you're hurt!" "Hurt," Beth said. "Short on time. And low on patience, so... Please, rediscover the old internal monologue." Beth hobbled toward the stone steps leading up to Martin's office, dragging Sophia with her. The stairs led to a Roman-style atrium, floored in red and white check. A place for Martin to sit and look out across the greenery, or to meet with fellow business people. His office on the far side of the atrium locked and sealed. Fortunately, an L-shaped gantry led from the right, straight to a square helipad and hung off the side of the building. The ride was already cycling its blades, building to a muted turbine shriek. The pilot glanced between them and overheads, willing the machine to get airborne. "Jack, that chopper's leaving without us!" Jack zipped down the gantry, banked left around the curve, headed for the pad, just as the helicopter lifted off the pad. The pilot caught sight of Jack and went defensive, banking hard and low over the side of the building. "Jack!" Beth could see what he was doing. "Don't be stupid!" Beth needled the medic, and that chopper was their only way out of here. Jack threw himself toward the lip, throwing his arms forward in an attempt to localize a stutter around the chopper. He ended face down on the pad, 2 feet from a 50-story drop. He came to as Beth grabbed him by the collar, hauling him to his feet, and laughed out loud. The helicopter floated below the platform, angled slightly, blades immobile, hanging in space. Sophia gasped at the sight of it. Jack smiled, satisfied with himself. "If it's stupid and it works, it ain't stupid, right?" "Eurocopter Airbus AS-365, Beth muttered. "Just like she ordered." The bubble wasn't large enough to have trapped the entire bird. just the midsection and blades. Jack could see the pilot still animated, frantically strangling at the controls, but going nowhere. "Can you make the jump on that leg?" "We got a bigger problem." Beth pointed back the way that they came. Chronon 1 had stormed the garden, moving at speed toward the helipad. "They just lost 2 of their guys," Jack said. "They're pissed." "Keep Sophia safe. Jack took Sophia's hand. "Trust me." And Jack shoved Sophia Amaral off the edge of Monarch Tower. The doctor fell without a sound, shocked into silence that her life would end so suddenly. She fell toward the helicopter, but wide of it, connecting with the stutter bubble Jack had thrown around the chopper. Sophia Amaral froze, suspended in space, 5 feet from the open passenger door in the trapped helicopter. "Woo!" Beth's looks was either confusion or murderous intent. Jack gestured, successful, self-evident. "What?" "Your balls," she said. "On a stump." Beth backed up and took a running leap toward the edge of Chronon 1 started blasting. She bounded off the lip, the pain of it forcing a cry from her throat. Launching herself into space, she aimed her still cycling boots for the helicopter's open side door and hoped for the best. She fell feet first through a bubble, through the door, and hit the carpeted floor inside, slamming into the closed starboard side passenger door. White pain flooded from leg to brain, and Beth skimmed right across the surface of a total blackout. "Back in the game, Wilder. Back in the game." "Get the doctor!" Jack dumped a Chronon burst as Chronon 1 hit Hatch's Romanesque atrium, catching the incoming fire. He took the lip of the platform at a run, leaping across the space. "Sorry, Doctor," landing boots first onto the chest of Dr. Sophia Amaral. She didn't move a micron, and Jack's feet went out from under him. His back connected with her sternum, and he bounced off. One flailing hand seized onto Sophia's outstretched forearm, leaving Jack's feet flailing 50 stories above Riverport streets. Beth had already scrambled halfway over the cream-colored calf leather passenger seats, dealing with the inconvenience of having to do so with a gun taking up one hand while screaming at the pilot. Dangling, Jack reached out for the upper rim of the helicopter door, grabbed it, and began to will Sophia loose from the hold of the stutter bubble. As her stasis softened, he pulled in further, one foot finding purchase inside the door. He drew her forward, grabbing onto a more secure safety loop bolted into the ceiling. Sophia found her voice, a sound that went from silence to bass syrup to a human scream, and suddenly she was so much dead weight, falling straight down. Jack held her hand in a tight monkey grip, shoulder-wrenching as he caught her full weight. From the helipad, Gibson was shouting for blood. Chronon 1 was almost to the edge of the pad. Beth glanced back over her shoulder. "Get her inside!" Jack hauled her up. Sophia clawing at the carpet, panicking as her sheer evening gown kept her leg from swinging up and into the chopper. Someone started shooting, slugs vipping into the shield. Donnie, red-faced and furious, glared down at them, then vanished from the edge of the helipad. Beth buckled herself in one hand. To the pilot. "All right, asshole. Sit tight and you'll be home in time for Kimmel." She put her gun away and took the second stick. Jack heard Gibson call Donnie's name just as he hauled Sophia inside the chopper. Sophia fumbled her way into a jump seat, wrestling with the safety belt. "Beth, take the stick!" Donnie vaulted off the edge of the helipad, his trajectory taking him straight for the open passenger door, handgun pointed square at Jack's face. Jack threw his arms wide and nullified the field. The helicopter sprang into sudden life, and Jack was flipped off of his feet as blades threw Donnie in 2 directions at once. Gibson saw it all. His face a disfigured mess, contorted by an obliterating rage at the loss of his best friend and second in command. His weapon unloaded right at them, without a second thought. The stick had bucked suddenly in Beth's hand as the helicopter kicked back to life, but she wasn't letting it win. Jack sculled back from the open door as the chopper's frame swerved and tilted, grabbing hard onto a jump seat support as Beth sent the bird into a dive. Beth had a death grip on the stick. Keeping the bird low, she swung it over the Mystic River. Once their flight was stable and level, Beth thumbed a contact on her phone, piped it to her earpiece. "Horatio, you in the tower? I need a favor." Inside Monarch Tower, on the 35th floor mezzanine, Nick watched a gathering of the world's wealthiest and brightest freak the hell out. Everything needed a security card, and he didn't have one. He was trapped. "Hey, you!" A man marched toward Nick along the curve of the mezzanine. Handlebar mustache, loud bowling shirt under which was something about theater sports. "Horatio," he said. "Friend of Beth's. Look like today's my last day. Let's get out of here." "Sir, yes, sir," Nick said. "One stop first. Super important. Floor 50.